Business leaders from G20 economies will also meet in Hangzhou. They'll be discussing effective ways to boost global growth. Ming Tian has the details.
The global economy slowdown has affected almost every country. To revive growth, China's major agency for promoting foreign investment and trade put together a meeting of business leaders from the group of 20 major economies. The organizer of the so-called B20 meeting says policymakers have to clear roadblocks for global trade.
We recommend the government set up transparent guidelines for trade policies, allow agencies to access the process, and help with dispute settlement.
Last month, the China Council for Promotion of International Trade finished a report for the Leaders' Summit. Its president, Jiang Zhengwei, says the report will shed light on issues concerning economic governance.
It's not only concerned with growth, but also the well-being of people around the world. I am confident that the report will be welcomed by all members and become the reference for policy making.
The Business Circle's policy recommendation has 20 items, such as building high-quality infrastructure, funding small businesses, and developing a digital economy.
We hope the governments would reach consensus and provide a good environment for the flow of capital and goods.
Chinese President Xi Jinping will address the meeting, which a number of political leaders will attend. The need to boost global economy is urgent, and the business community hopes the leaders will not only make promises of growth, but more importantly, to turn them into policy and action. Ming Tian, CCTV, Hangzhou, Zhejiang Province.
Let's get more now from Wu Guoxiu, who's live for us in Hangzhou. Wu Guoxiu, we're now only a day away from the kickoff of the G20 summit. What's the latest from Hangzhou?
Well, as we speak, 10 leaders have arrived in Hangzhou since yesterday. They include presidents from Turkey, Argentina, and South Africa. The rest of them will arrive in the next 2 days. As they arrive, security has been lifted to the highest level. The city's iconic scenic spot, the West Lake, is believed to be the place that the presidents are going to stay. So since they arrived, people are not allowed to visit the West Lake since yesterday, and the surrounding shops are all closed. Local people are given a 7-day off to encourage them to travel out of town. I remember that in 2014 in Brisbane, Australia, people had 3 days off during the summit. So was last year in Antalya, Turkey. So I think this time Hangzhou's holiday is much longer than that. As for the preparation of the G20 summit, coordinators have finished their last meeting today discussing on the communique to be discussed by leaders during the summit and to be published after the summit. Some basic agreements have been reached for a blueprint of innovation-driven growth and an initiative of supporting the African countries and the industrialization, and also the least developed countries, and also an action plan of the UN's 2013 development agenda.
What should we expect in the coming hours?
Well, we should say the big day really starts from tomorrow. That's the B20 summit. The B20 is a major support group of the G20 from the business circles. Chinese President Xi Jinping will speak at the summit. 5 other presidents from other countries will also attend. There will also be heads from the WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank. Some global top 500 companies and China's top 500 companies will also attend at the summit. Well, they will discuss the plan on global infrastructure connectivity, which I believe might relate to China's One Belt and One Road initiative, and also to build a global online trade platform, which is going to be proposed by China's e-commerce giant Jack Ma, whose company is actually based in Hangzhou. They will also talk about suggestions to the innovation growth of the global economy. So these are all the key topics to be discussed at the G20 summit, which will come right after this B20. Back to you.
All right, Wu Guoxiu joining us live there from Hangzhou. Many thanks. Well, let's now get an African perspective on this, and I'm joined live from Johannesburg by Dr. David Munyai, co-director of the Confucius Institute at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Munyai, thank you very much for joining us. How does Africa stand to benefit from greater representation and participation at the forthcoming G20 summit?
I think there are a lot of issues that Africa is looking forward to in terms of discussions. And first and foremost, all African representatives, former representatives, countries such as South Africa and Egypt, will be able to speak from an African set agenda. In this case, one makes reference to the African Agenda 2063, which details the kind of changes and the kind of strategic partnership that Africa is looking to have with the international community. And therefore, having a very close strategic partner such as China, as well as India, I think through BRICS, will be able to discuss issues pertaining to global South concerns. Here mainly, I think the issue of industrialization is quite critical to deal with unemployment, which is very high on the African continent, as well as dealing with issues of environment and how to attract investment. I think it is quite heartening that the slow growth in developed countries has a huge impact on the African continent. Africa needs growth in developed countries, and to ensure that it can partner and have a business that deals with core issues which are well spelled out in the Sustainable Development programs that the United Nations and all other institutions of global governance are dealing with. And therefore, this G20 summit is quite critical to Africa.
Right. And what are the key considerations that should guide the participation of African leaders at that summit?
I think what is critical is to look at issues that are going to discuss formally, as well as to take advantage of on the side discussions. Global peace and security is quite critical, and as you are aware, Africa depends on trade with China, and therefore the South China Sea issues and disputes, if they are dealt with in a peaceful manner, it's good for Africa, as well as dealing with conflict on the African continent itself. There has been huge outflow of African into Europe, the issue of immigration and movement of people. And I think global leaders would find a common position as well as consensus how to deal with these critical issues. But more importantly, Africa has been losing a lot of resources through this illicit flow of capital from the continent. And China has suggested that a fair taxation system will be discussed. So these are some of the issues that African representatives and Africa as a whole would want to see tabled and dealt with decisively by the international community through the G20 summit.
All right. Great insights there, Dr. David Munyai, live for us here in Johannesburg. Many thanks for joining us. Now, also with me in studio for a further discussion on this is George Musemali, an anti-terrorism expert. George, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, time and again, as we talk about the G20 summit, we've been talking about Africa getting industrialized, trade, investments. But of course, we can't talk about that without addressing the critical issue of security, which is a huge hurdle when it comes to Africa's development. So what kind of engagement should African leaders seek at the G20 summit in this regard?
Penina, Africa should go asking for more development in Africa. Because if you look at the kind of conflicts that we are witnessing within the borders of Africa, most of them are poverty related. A lot of inequality in the distribution of resources. And this is leading to people engaging each other. We have a crisis in Gabon right now. We have one close by here in Southern Sudan. People are fighting for resources. And the only solution to this is more development for Africa, where we will have resources distributed equitably. And you'll find that also we are facing a challenge of radicalization of the youth. Why are we having youth getting radicalized? It's because they feel shortchanged. They have no stake in the economy of the continent. And this is why we say that unless the world looks at Africa and brings in more development so that we will have our youth being engaged gainfully engaged, getting employed, and then dealing with this issue of radicalization, then basically we will not be talking about boosting the economy of this continent at all. So the leaders in Africa should go out there asking for more development to be channeled into Africa, opening up Africa to the rest of the world, and also opening up enough democratic space so that we have the Africans participating in their own rulings.
Right, and you talked of radicalization then. This isn't just happening here in Africa, it's a global problem right now. That's why we're talking of global terrorism. And we've seen security experts calling for G20 to come up with tangible solutions to deal with this. What do you expect from this summit in regards to global terrorism and putting an end to it?
We should look at terrorism afresh because let's bear in mind that this is not a new phenomenon. The questions that we need to be asking ourselves right now is what has changed. Countries around the world have absorbed and dealt with this terror threat in their own different ways. But the question now, what precedents can we use in coming up with future response to the threat of terrorism around the world? We need to ask ourselves, what can we learn from the past attacks that we can use also to come up with new policies on how to deal with terrorism around the world? So this is something that we need to look at afresh, ask ourselves what is new, what has changed, and formulate policies that will help us deal with this phenomenon that has been there for generations. What we can say right now is that there's no way security can be able to deal with terrorism. We can't end terrorism, but at least we must reduce the number of terror attacks that we are witnessing currently in the world. Since the month of March, we've seen attacks all over the world. We've seen them in Europe, we've seen them in Africa, we've seen America also being threatened. So it's a new thing that needs to be dealt with the G20 leaders formulating new policies on how to deal with terrorism.
All right, George Musamali, live for us here in studio. Many thanks, George.